Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Donnybrook. Good to have you with us on this wonderful Thursday, and we thank you very much. A little later today, we're going to talk to Dr. Margie Vandeven, who's the commissioner for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. She'll be on the hot seat on the second half of tonight's program. But first, we have a lot of issues we need to kick around, and we welcome to our panel, sitting in for Wendy Weiss, who's taking the week off, Christine Byers from 5 on Your Side at KSDK. She's making her Donnybrook debut, and we're so glad about that. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Charlie.
Also with us, we have Mr. Bill McClellan, one of the founders of the program. Of course, he's with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Mr. Ray Hartmann, who is the host of In the Know on KTRS every weeknight at 9 o'clock. Ray Hartmann, good evening, sir. And we also have Mr. Alvin Reid joining us from the Riverfront Times, as well as, gosh darn, St. Louis American, 590 AM, 97.1, and the list goes on and on. Alvin, how are you doing?
Doing great.
You know, folks,
the Riverfront Times now?
No, that I don't know where that one came from.
I saw your personal ad in the Riverfront Times.
Okay, I thought he got another job. He's got every job in town.
Ray is with the Riverfront Times. Alvin can be found in the St. Louis American. And next week, you'll see me I'll be looking in the Help Wanted section of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. By the way,
Charlie, I gave people 90 million reasons to fire me last summer. It was supposed to be 9.
You know what?
I remember that.
Next week, when I introduce Alvin, I'm just going to say all the places you don't work, and that'll be quicker. Today is St. Louis Give Day, and we want to remind everybody to remember the 9 Network at 9net.org. If you would like to share what you can, no contribution is too big, no contribution is too small, of course, and we thank you in advance for your generosity. Alvin, I want to ask you about some action taken in the courts this week. Number one, St. Louis attorney Beavis Schock sued, and he said that the St. Louis City and St. Louis County cannot shut down businesses. According to the state charter, that only belongs to the state health department. Also today, he called for the resignation of the city's health director, Fred Eccles. Why? Well, he said that Eccles doesn't meet any of the 3 standards to be the health director, so he's asked for Eccles to resign. What are your thoughts on Beavis Schock, the attorney, this week?
Well, I think if you're an attorney and you have that last name, I guess you're used to saying shocking things. However, he went completely over the line in representing these folks who want the, shelter in place taken away. His comments about death and the pandemic were disgusting. And if I were to be called on any kind of, judicial panel, I would tell him the same. Also, I think that would hurt his case if I was a juror and he brought that attitude in there. Now, I guess he has a right to represent anybody he wants to. And the people who hired him to do so, in my estimation, are pretty much like just setting their money on fire because he's representing them in a case that will probably be gone in less than 2 weeks. So just all the way around, I think he said some very messy and inopportune things, and he ought to be ashamed of himself. And there's a lot of that going around in this nation right now, but I think he put his foot right smack dab in the middle of it.
Well I'd like to defend him, Charlie.
Yeah, let me just tell our viewers, he was quoted in the paper when he was asked, okay, if you allow the businesses to stay open, people will die. And he said, we're in a pandemic. In pandemics, people will die. Bill?
Yes, and I thought, I'm against the lawsuit, but I thought he was just being honest and not trying to sugarcoat what he's doing. That if social distancing is taken away and everything is opened up, it is going to cause a certain amount of human carnage. And I thought Beavis Schock was just being honest about people will die. That's what happens in a pandemic. I was not disgusted like Alvin was with it.
I was disgusted. I mean, the idea that he would say, "Hey, yo, I got an antique shop to represent here. I got a gym." My own take of it, and it's not really a conspiracy theory, is it looks like this is sort of the work of the Show Me Institute. He's the secretary of the Show Me Institute. Somebody had to pick a client, one from the county, one from the city. It looks like a libertarian statement that's, I guess they're entitled to make, but I'm with Alvin. It was very tasteless to say, "Hey, people are going to die," whatever. I disagree in substance with what he's doing.
Well, he is an attorney, and he looked at the law, and he believes in the case of Fred Eccles that Eccles doesn't meet the requirements of the law, and he looked at the state law that says that only the health department could shut down businesses in the city and the county, not the county health directors. So, he might be libertarian, he might not. I think that he is libertarian, but if the law is the law, is he wrong?
Yeah, I just want to point out this isn't the first time that the city hasn't had a health director that lacks those credentials. But in the past, they've always been sort of interim directors. So I'm not sure that they need to have those same credentials in place, but this is not the first time.
Hey, let's move on to topic number 2. Ray Hartmann, you wrote about Jeff Jensen, our U.S. attorney, who was called into action by the Attorney General, William Barr, about 2 or 3 months ago. And he was asked to look into the FBI's prosecution of Michael Flynn. Mike Flynn was supposed to be the national security advisor, but he pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI in January of 2017. Well, Jensen unearthed all sorts of FBI documents that showed, among other things, the FBI did not turn over exculpatory information, as it's required to do by law, before Michael Flynn pleaded guilty. So the Justice Department today actually dropped the case, probably because of Jensen's actions.
Well, first of all, for Jeff Jensen, if Donald Trump is reelected, it's a good career move. Jeff Jensen's just a pawn in this. I mean, he kept his head down pretty well. The story is, this is just an amazing, Adam Schiff said it was the worst ever. I don't know if he'll go that far, but this was an amazing abuse by William Barr and really Donald Trump to as Kevin O'Malley, the ambassador, our attorney here said it, and I quoted in my column, if a guy, in this case, a 3-star general trained in military intelligence, lies not once, but twice, in which he admits before a judge under oath, irrespective of this interview, after being interviewed in what they call a non-custodial way, meaning he could have ended the interview anytime he wanted. If he says, Kevin O'Malley's take was great, then the problem is with military training, not with the judicial system. It's ridiculous. Michael Flynn lied admitted twice under oath that he had lied, irrespective of the interview they're talking about. It's nuts. And by the way, the judge doesn't have to accept DOJ dropping his case, and there's a good chance it won't, and that Trump will just use this as an excuse to. This is all about Trump and Flynn.
Well, if I might just jump in, the judge is Emmett Sullivan, and he presided over the Ted Stevens trial, where again the prosecutors didn't hand over the exculpatory information, and he was livid then. So I'm not sure he'll disagree with what happened. But what did happen in this particular case is that there was a memo that Jensen unearthed, and it was from the FBI, and they said, we're going to try and trap him and get him to lie so that we can prosecute him or he will quit. And that's the memo that really was the smoking gun here. They didn't tell him that this was an investigatory interview. They didn't apprise him that he might want to get a counsel. And in fact, James Comey later bragged that they did not tell him that he might want to get a lawyer. So, and they went, Lisa Page went around the White House counsel. And by the way, I think he also pleaded guilty because they threatened to prosecute his son.
It's a smoking toy gun, okay? First, just a little history. We don't want to take this much time. But first, he lied to Mike Pence, which is what got the whole thing started. And then Trump had to fire him. Then after this. He went before a judge. Whatever the FBI's motives or notes were had nothing to do with the fact that Michael Flynn went before a judge, not once, but twice, the second time in his sentencing, under oath, and admitted that he lied. And he's a trained general. It's just nuts. And but it's all part of the national political noise.
Well,
but I will say this: Jeff Jensen is widely known here with a good reputation.
He is.
And as this plays out, to the extent I think he didn't do it, so I talked about when I wrote the column. This ain't going to do him any good at the end. I don't think.
Funny thing about this case, though, and that is that the FBI's own memos indicated that they had dropped the Russian collusion investigation on January 4th of 2017. And so why did they interview him later when they weren't even pursuing that collusion at that particular point? And I think it might have been because they wanted to prosecute him to get him out of there. I think it kind of reeks of deep state to me.
Well.
All right, let's move on.
Can go on and on.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, how about this, Bill McClellan? J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, has kind of changed his tune. He's going to start opening up his state in June. And we heard also from County Executive Sam Page in St. Louis County and the mayor of St. Louis, Lyda Krewson, that they're going to start opening up their jurisdictions too. It was a week ago that we said that Eureka and Franklin County were out of line. How can they open up? We're not seeing a downward trajectory in hospitalizations or cases. And yet here we are now. Leaders locally are opening up. How do you feel about that?
Well, we're an impatient people. And should have known that once the weather turned good, everybody would want to be outside. And, there may be a price to pay for our newfound liberties, but we're gonna push it. And I don't blame Sam Page or Lyda Krewson for saying, okay, in a couple of weeks, we're going to start doing it because people are getting so pushy right now. Like Beavis Shocks cases where people are saying, I'm going to open up. What are you going to do to me? So I can understand this push to start opening up.
Well, I was just going to say that one thing that Sam Page, I guess, and both Lyda did, they're really holding to the same time schedule that they had announced, that this would be reviewed in, mid to late August. And while I understand it's now the 5th and they're saying this is where we're going, they're still on that same kind of timeline. So I don't think in other words, I think it's allowable, at least on my part. I'm going to give myself Mike Flynn, expungement or whatever, and just say that it was fine for me to be upset with Franklin County and be okay with St. Louis County beginning to open 2 weeks from now.
It's all about timing. I mean, I just think we've moved too soon. I think we probably still are. Not one state has met the CDC's criteria that they first laid out about 14 days of decrease. And Bill's right. I mean, I think this comes from Washington. I think the Trump administration has officially checked out on it. And I think that Donald Trump made this about himself from the beginning. And from his perspective, this is about re-election and getting the economy.
If I could keep the show local, Ray,
I am, but I'm saying
I don't think this is as much about Trump as it is about the citizens here. I mean, I was at Forest Park today, and it was crowded. People want to get out, and I don't think people are listening to Donald Trump or.
No, I'm saying that the political process has been started from there. I'm not trying to make it national. I'm just saying that whether it's Parson, whether it's Steve Elman in St. Charles, whether it's the Page and Krewson, everything's flowed down from Washington. And now I'll tell you one thing we should do.
I can't imagine that
it's going to come up to us.
Are taking their marching orders.
It's going to come up to our behavior as far as how we end up doing ourselves.
We're surrounded by places that are obviously giving in. So what good is it? Because of the traffic, of where people work and all that. I mean, what can you do? I mean, right now, there are people all over St. Louis County that are from Franklin County and from St. Charles County and from any other state, Texas, Arizona, wherever. They're coming and going. There's no stopping that. So, I mean, maybe they're just thinking like, what good is it?
Well, Christine, you've got 3 little boys. You must be going nuts. I mean, my daughter's got a couple kids, and I mean, how do you as a mother feel about this?
It's so confusing because literally on our webpage at KSDK, we will have two stories. One saying, Missouri or Illinois is logging record number of deaths, hospitalizations, admissions, positive tests, you name it. And then right underneath it is, news of reopening. So it's very hard as a parent to kind of determine what's safe and what's best. Like, we need a new pair of shoes for one of my little guys, and he wants nothing more than to go to Target and pick out what he wants because mom's just not good at picking those out anymore, apparently. But I'm just not safe, comfortable, what have you, bringing him out yet to go do that. So it's hard to know. And when the businesses are starting to reopen in that, we're just going to kind of wait and see too. I mean, in Illinois, they've got this regional plan going on. This sort of let's take little baby steps and see, and then we'll come back and put those restrictions in place if we see some numbers start to tick back up again. And they're really kind of going on the data, it seems like, in Illinois, as far as how many confirmed cases and where are they in the densely populated areas. They've kind of drawn maps in that respect. So St. Louis City and St. Louis County, of course, are the most densely populated. So I'm going to sit back and wait.
I'm with Christine, Charlie, I'm with Christine in this. I think we're going to stay home. We're pretty much in our family going to elect to stay home. I think it's everybody has to make their own decision. I mean, some people don't have the choice. They got to go to work. I mean, if their business opens. But my point is this is one time that I hope I have the really bad feeling about this. And I really hope I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong.
Let me say this.
I'd love to be wrong.
This morning, I talked to our Washington, D.C. Correspondent, Major Garrett, about life in Washington, D.C. And he says he goes jogging. He doesn't see anybody. Nobody's on the sidewalk. Nobody's in the parks, okay? Nobody's on the streets. Now, compare and contrast to our area. I live near Hanley Road. Originally, during the pandemic, it was empty. You could lie down on it. That's not the case anymore. Cars are heading to Clayton in the morning during rush hour. They're leaving in the evening. My sister said that 6440 was jammed last Friday afternoon. Alvin in Kirkwood, I was told that next to Mike Duffy's restaurant, there is a Mexican restaurant on Cinco de Mayo. The crowd was in the street drinking. Yes. The police were watching them. There's a crowd that gathers at the wharf at Shoto weeknights at 9 to midnight. The businesses are saying hundreds of people. None of them have masks. I don't really, the politicians say they want to open up. I got to tell you something. I think we've already opened up in the city and the county.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, Sam Page even said something about, no mask, no service. But my response to that's good luck. I mean, there were businesses in St. Charles County that we were covering that were just overwhelmed with people, waiting to be served and all kinds of stuff. I mean, people are fed up. They want to gather. And I don't know that they're really going to be weighing whether there are masks or not. I mean, I know I am for me, but I think I'm in the minority.
I think the masks are the metaphor of our time because all the health officials, I know you've had them on your show. I have. There's Bill. There's Bill. But it all, that's a fine mask. But
it is a fine mask.
Christine,
I got a lot of comments in it.
It's a very fine mask.
Like
but it is, Charlie, all the health experts tell you one thing. The mask doesn't protect you from other people. It protects other people from you.
Yeah.
And it's the metaphor. It's the statement. If you're unwilling to wear a mask in public when you go to a store, it's your way of saying, in my mind, I don't care about the other folks because it doesn't help you as much as it protects them.
Yeah,
I think it's really sad that we politicize anything.
I agree with you, Ray, on that one.
And I just think, and those of us that have been arguing that this is too soon, that the numbers are going to be high, it's anybody that would take satisfaction being right about that is sick. I mean, obviously we want to see no more deaths. I'm just afraid we really are playing with fire myself.
Hey, Christina, also, I'm sorry, Alvin, did you have something to say?
No.
Okay. Christine Byers, I want to ask you about plans in Jefferson City by the General Assembly to protect nursing homes against litigation. Of course, we've had way too many deaths in nursing homes, and it's been very difficult for everybody. But what do you think? Should nursing homes enjoy certain protections from future lawsuits?
I don't believe so. I mean, I've interviewed a family with an absolutely heartbreaking story, and they're just one of dozens, if not hundreds, at this point. But basically, they had their mother is in a nursing home, that Frontier nursing home in St. Charles County, and they hadn't heard from her in weeks. She's got some dementia. She has some issues from a stroke. And so they weren't able to communicate with her, and the nursing home staff was unavailable as well. And so the phone would ring and ring and ring. And if they would get through, she didn't have a phone in her room. I mean, it was just a disaster. So it got to the point where her daughter actually went to her window. And when she looked in, she was, it was the scene she had nightmares about. Her mother's in her bed in a hospital gown, hooked up to oxygen, and clearly suffering from COVID. And she hadn't been told what was going on. And so it was more of a communication issue. I mean, for them, they definitely talked to me about wanting to file some sort of lawsuit potentially, but they actually were very thoughtful of the staff there. And they were concerned that it would end up just harming the staff. And their beef was not with the nurses that were caring for their loved ones. They believed that they were doing the best that they could. I mean, my goodness, 10 or 12 of the staff there contracted the virus themselves. Their beef was with the management of these nursing homes that were not doing, in their minds, a good enough job of preparing for this sort of thing and allowing these patients and establishing clear lines of communications, bringing in crisis management people to just handle that piece of it alone. But the fact is that they want to have that option to file a lawsuit, and they need to feel that they can.
Well, it sounds like, Christine, the people you were talking with were very nice and very thoughtful and wanting to protect the workers as well. But I'm afraid that this is a virus that nobody was prepared for. And so many of our nursing homes, which are for-profit institutions, and they hire people at very low wages, and they got overwhelmed by this. And I think they do need lawsuit protection. Otherwise, we won't have any nursing homes except the really expensive ones.
Bill, you are so wrong. We had this argument on tour for 3 decades. Look,
we have it every few years.
We do. First of all, and no, I mean, if we argue about crime, I lose, but on this one, I don't. Here's the deal. First of all, Missouri has some of the best protection for corporations to start with under so-called tort reform. Second of all, the idea that the only people we're going to inoculate in this whole virus are the corporations is crazy. I mean, here's the deal. We have a jury system. If there's a frivolous lawsuit, or obviously any jury would take into account, should it get to a jury, that this is a horrible situation. And by the way, the good nursing homes, which is most of them, the good senior citizens centers, don't have anything to fear. There was that one example that's reported.
Oh, Ray, don't be silly. If this thing goes wide on lawsuits, some lawyer's whoever dies in a nursing home, some lawyer's gonna pick up on it, and it won't just be the.
You want to give them a blank check? You want to give a blank check for like?
But my thought is that no business that's put in a situation that it's not prepared for technically should be shielded from being sued over something it did. I mean, there are. I mean, 1,000 might get filed. One might actually be successful. But if that one is just for some, like, I don't mean horrific behavior, where they just messed up, okay, and then they're just not held to any legal standard for it. I think that's treading on thin ice.
Well, it was interesting because the nursing home that you referred to, I believe, was Frontier, and you're reporting, Christine Byers, and they had some bad cases that they were cited by the federal government, I believe, last fall for the workers changing diapers and then not washing their hands before they serve the food, things like that. And if you do violate the basic practices of hygiene and you're a nursing home, should you be liable for that?
Well, what about the case? Go ahead. No, go ahead, Chris.
I'm sorry. I think too that these are medical facilities, and I mean, hospitals plan for outbreaks and pandemics and crisis situations. should nursing homes be? I mean, I understand we're all unprepared. This is unprecedented. Absolutely. I'll give you that. No doubt about it. But I also feel like, I mean, nursing homes should be equipped for infections that are not just pandemic related. I mean, outbreaks of any kind of virus at a place like that. You have to have some crisis management in place for that.
And there was a local report, Charlie, there was local reporting on a nursing home where somebody tried to call in sick with COVID symptoms, and they made that employee come in, and then people got the virus.
I think there was an allegation, right?
Yeah. Well, but I mean, let's just take that as a set of facts.
Okay, final topic. Got to get to you, Alvin, on this one. By the way, congratulations with your new job at the Riverfront Times, Alvin.
Yeah, thank you so much.
John Burroughs High School, one of the great high schools in America, in our own backyard, did get about $2.2 million in federal money. They decided to send it back after the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, said, hey, you shouldn't take that money. How do you feel? Was it appropriate for Burroughs to send that money back?
Absolutely not. They should be ashamed of themselves. So should the Lakers. So should the Cardinals, as Ray reported last week. Listen, it's you might be entitled to the money, but they're still right and wrong in America. And if you go that direction, then you're just wrong. And Burroughs was just wrong. And by the way, you have to fill this out. Now, we're going to all, I guess, get, a stimulus check for our family. If we had to fill out an application of some type to get it, millions of Americans would not do it because they would say, I don't need this money. So, I mean, so thus, if I did fill it out, I would have to ask myself, Alvin, do you need this money? And Burroughs should have done the same thing and came to the answer, no. Where I come to the answer, heck yes.
I think Alvin is so right on this. I mean, because the Burroughs, they always talk about the John Burroughs community. I mean, they're special and they're thoughtful and for them to just say, well, we had a chance to grab the money, why shouldn't we grab it? That's weak, I think.
And there's a material difference.
I think too that any business or any entity that's going to apply for this kind of money should really think through before they do, how is this going to be received if the public finds out we've done this?
Got it.
And
okay.
You need to be prepared to handle that.
Speaking of education, we're going to talk to the state's commissioner for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on the second half of our show tonight. So don't touch that dial because we'll be right back.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network. Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
And thank you for joining us for the second half. Good to have you aboard as we put Dr. Margie Vandeven, the Commissioner for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in the state of Missouri, on the hot seat. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Everybody's talking about education in Missouri in the coronavirus pandemic. How are we doing in your estimation?
I think we're doing as well as we could. You're right. Everyone's talking about this across the entire nation. Our teachers are working relentlessly to serve our children. And the reality is it's difficult to do. And so you'll hear mixed bags, mixed results across the state. And I think that's probably what we'll talk about tonight is how do we really try to work together to solve those inequities that we're seeing and make sure that we're able to reach every child during this time period. But for the most part, hats off to our educators, hats off to our school leaders, to our parents, to our community leaders who are really working together to make this work as best as they can.
Christine, would you like to pose the first question?
Sure. So, Commissioner, one of the things, so I'm a parent. I've got 3 kids, elementary age. And I'm looking out at the abyss of this coming summer and, uncertain about childcare, summer camps, all of that. Is there any discussion at all about changing the start date at all for when school's going to resume? I mean, I don't know that that's even possible, but have there been any considerations about adjusting summer schools hours or starting any earlier, any later, anything like that? You know, forecasting out, looking out ahead.
Lots of conversation about that. And in fact, it's on our board agenda for Tuesday. It's actually the State Board of Education who has the authority to waive that start date. Last year, the state legislature passed a requirement of when schools would be allowed to start the fall semester. The State Board of Education has the authority to waive that for extenuating circumstances. I never want to get ahead of my board because that's up for a vote, but I do believe I'm bringing forward the recommendation to waive that date if necessary, because these truly are extenuating circumstances. And when you think about some students, schools being closed since March 19th, some students being reached, some not. We want to try to put as much flexibility in there as possible for school. Again, local districts would decide that, but put the flexibility in there. Same with summer school. We had a task force. The number one thing they came back with was, let's make sure we give our communities flexibility to start as early as possible, or as late into August for summer school potentially. Staggered timeout days, staggered hours. Be thinking about this vastly differently than we have in the past. So lots of discussion about it. And the word you use, still uncertainty. I mean, there's just still a huge level of uncertainty as to what the summer and the fall will look like in our schools.
Yeah, because certainly I wondered, do teacher union contracts come into play there? I mean, is that a consideration? You can't just move start dates and that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah. They'll be working with their teacher groups. They'll be working with their contracts. The big thing is, in most cases, I don't see that they'll be able to add a lot of extended hours or days, although some people would like to do that. Funding is attached to that. Contract days are attached to that. So, of course, all of that goes into that decision making, which is why that's done with their local school boards.
Doctor, I saw some tentative guidelines that just seem so strong. I mean, extreme, like no extracurricular activities, kids going like on staggered days. And I'm a grandparent, and I thought, my poor daughter, if one kid goes on Monday and the other child goes on Tuesday, and poor kids, if there's no extracurricular activities, I mean, how are you looking at this stuff?
We're looking at the whole picture. And I think maybe some of the guidance you're talking about was really designed at different levels of extremity. So if we are required to social distance for, say 10 people to a room, we have to think, what would that look like in a classroom? What would that look like on a school bus? What would that look like in the football field? So really, again, just trying to think of the whole picture. What you're seeing, I believe, are guidelines for that kind of extremity if we have to remain with social distancing for a period of time. And there is no easy answer, no doubt about it. Absolutely.
How concerned are you, Doctor, with the future of funding for public education in our state? I mean, you're obviously not a legislator and you're in the administration, but we're already in the lower part of the country per pupil in funding public education. And there's been so much talk about cuts to the budget, understandably, because are we going to get enough federal funds, do you think, to help you? Or are you concerned about our future in being able to provide enough funding for children in Missouri?
Well, we'll educate our kids, no doubt about it. Am I concerned? Sure. Most of what the budget for K-12 education revolves around is general revenue. We know we're watching that very closely as a state and keeping a close eye on that right now. We are getting federal relief. We just received $208 million that will go to school districts in response to the virus. The governor's additional $56 million for the same type of response. I'm sorry, $54.6 million. So we're getting some relief, but sure, I think the advice we're giving our districts is to proceed cautiously this year in any kind of budgeting plans that they're moving forward with. Because we are dependent upon that revenue, and we're just watching that. Again, I hate to use this word, but it's a word that we keep hearing. A lot of uncertainty still. We'll know much more when July comes. when July gets here and taxes are due and that sort of thing.
Doctor, as Mother Day approaches, my mom taught 30 years in the Kirkwood School District and was a Teacher of the Year and was also a former Missouri State Teachers Association president. And in speaking with her, it's from the time that it was decided, okay, everybody, school is off. And it was happening about spring break time in many districts around us here. But it was only about, a week, 10 days before teachers were expected to be able to present some type of, educational plan online. How was that done? How did that exactly happen? And I realize there are some, discrepancies. Some kids didn't have computers and all that. But it seems to me that children have been educated over the last 6 weeks and going into the end of the school year. There was an educational process. How did that happen?
Well, great question. And that's, again, why I have to say hats off to our teachers and to our leaders and to the families and everybody who's really working to try to pull this together to make it work for our kids. So you're right. I mean, it happened within days that our teachers were asked to do something vastly different, that our parents were asked to do something vastly different. And it looks different in different areas. So in some cases, students were sent home with a laptop and a hotspot, and the teachers were it was turn of a switch. They've been doing a lot of this work already. Different alternate methods for instruction had been sort of part of their routine already. And in some cases, particularly in our urban and rural areas, that access just didn't exist and still doesn't. And so they were doing things like making packets and delivering them on kids' doorsteps. We heard things like putting the materials in the local newspaper and delivering them on the doorsteps, and then collecting that kind of work back and forth. Some people were downloading onto their flash drives and then sending a flash drive home because they might have the computer, but they didn't have the Wi-Fi. So that is something that we are working hard to address as a state, a number of state agencies coming together. We just did a survey with all 555 LEAs and the local education agencies and our state districts and charters to really get feedback on what is it that we need to acquire as a state to make sure that we can serve all of our children well. So lots of different approaches, lots of creativity, no shortage of people just coming together and saying, we've got to buckle down and do this well. And they're really learning from each other. That's the other thing that's very impressive. Teachers working together, school districts working together, a lot of regional approach to this.
I have a sister who's teaching in Seattle, and she has 29 fifth graders, and they're trying to learn online. But on a typical day, she'll probably get 19 to 20 who will be there for the classroom. Some of them, even in Seattle, which, home of Microsoft, you'd assume that they're really hip to all this, but many of them don't have the computers, the laptops, the Wi-Fi, the connection. And then sometimes there are other issues, inside the home that for whatever reason, the person is not showing up to study. What has your experience been in Missouri? How many kids in the Missouri schools really have computers and online access?
So really, again, another interesting question. And one, when you talk about other issues, I think this is the other component that we need to add. Our schools have internet access and they're able to do that in school. But when you send maybe 3 kids home at the same time and suddenly mom and dad are working at home all off of the same network. So even if you think you're equipped, we're not really equipped to work under that magnitude of need. And so lots of different issues. What our survey is finding out in terms of internet access is it's about 21% do not have adequate access. So 1 in 5 kids, that's a lot for us. We're really going to work hard on that particular issue. But then there are other issues that you were getting to. I mean, in some cases, our districts are just saying we have to try to locate the student and make sure one of the big things that we're talking about now, that parent-school relationship has always been key. We can't emphasize it enough how key that relationship is between parents and teachers so that they can stay connected in these times of great need. And so I do not have the exact numbers for you because that is something that they're tracking at the local level right now, but we would like to get that information so that we do have that for future. I just have the internet capacity right now, which is 21%.
21%.
We've learned those lessons.
79%. Right.
Yeah, Charlie yells at us to have all the Wi-Fi turned off in our houses when we come back on. So we're learning too.
Hey, I've got a question about finance, Doctor, that's sort of on what Ray was talking about. If in fact, we have to get a bunch of kids computers and try to help them get Wi-Fi access, and if transportation is going to involve maybe twice as many buses if we want social distancing, this is going to be much more expensive, isn't it, than a normal school year?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot of what that funding was sent to us. The $208 million that I'm talking about specifically was to help with some of those scenarios and thinking about, things as simple as the cleaning products that schools are buying. Everything is expensive around this process. And so what we're trying to continue to convey is we're not looking for a new piece of equipment. We're looking for ways to educate our children, and we have to be able to do that as a state. And so I think what we're wanting to come together as an education community to look at is what is a long-term solution for the short-term crisis, because I don't think education is going to look the same in the future. And I'm sure you have heard that. I do not believe it will look the same. I do not believe it will all be completely online either. I think we've learned so much. What the number one thing our kids are saying they miss, their friends and their teachers, that relationship. You talk about your family. My brother was telling me about his little first grader getting on Zoom and seeing the classmates, and it brought them to tears. I mean, this is they miss each other. So I'm not suggesting that we will go to all online, but there are so many different things that we can do that equipment has become as essential to some of our kids as electricity, that we've talked about that for a long time in our agency, that we've got to be able to equip our children. So you're right. There's no shortage of cost in any of this. And transportation is another key part of that.
When you talk to your colleagues around the state, I don't know if you'll share what you discuss amongst yourselves, but how does Missouri's challenges, do they differ? How are we either better or worse in terms of how we're equipped? For example, that 21% number, how do we fit in sort of to other states?
So, everybody's struggling with this. I've not met any state that thinks they got this completely right. Most of us were on the phones together that very first week, mid-March, all saying, how are you handling school closures? What are you doing with it? I mean, it was all over the place. So I would say we're probably right in line. In many ways, we're better off. I will say that. In many ways, our budgets are better off. I think one of the strengths that we have in our state is again, I'll go back to it, but our superintendents are working together. They are wanting to keep kids at the forefront of this issue, and they're coming together as a region and saying, how do we keep the health and well-being of our children front and center and serve them well. So, I think that's a key thing that I've learned is the importance of having a lot of those guys in my cell phone that they can pick up the phone and we call, and lots of communication that's going on. And again, very, very focused on serving kids well. But every state is struggling with this, I will assure you. It's been tough.
Dr.
Wondering if this.
Go ahead.
I was wondering if there's also been talk about how this all is going to affect standardized testing. It's used as a measurement of how all of our children are doing academically, how districts are doing, that sort of thing. It's very important, but they've missed conventional schooling, and I can tell you, I am not very good at being a teacher myself and doing my job from home. So my third graders started fractions this week, and wow. So I just wondered, has there been given some thought to standardized testing and even looking at that issue and changing that in any way?
Yes, actually there has. And again, it's still early because those, will be in place next year. But yes. And, the interesting thing is I'm glad you pointed out that you realize why we have those standardized tests. So I want to make it clear. I think we always have to go back to the why. The why is to make sure that every child in our state has access to a high quality education. So it's really not about the gotcha. It's to say who's doing well, who is not, how do we provide resources where they need them more? And it's really trying to get that sense of the accountability is there, one, for taxpayer dollars, but it's in my heart, it's about making sure every kid has access to a high quality education. I kind of chuckle because it was, 6 weeks ago now, maybe, when we canceled standardized testing for the year. And that seemed like such a big, decision. And people all across the state were sending me all kinds of notes. And now it's like, of course, that's what we would have done. Just these things continue to evolve. So what happens when they come back in the fall? And what we need to do at that point in time is we're working together. Again, this is where our school leaders are so critical with critical partners in this. How do we know? It would be probably not wise for us to think that every fourth grader is going to walk in at the exact fourth grade level. How do we know when the student that lost half biology, just enrolling them in chemistry doesn't really cover the end of the biology? So how do we find out where they are? And what we're hearing more and more about is so our standards are pretty broad. What really matters? What do they really need to know? How do we find out where they are and then modify that assessment appropriately? So you'll be hearing more about that. Not ready to say it's going to be waived yet, but I do think some things will be modified.
Doctor, have most districts, are they, from what you're hearing, are they still doing the standard grading system? Have some kind of moved to pass, fail? Freezing your grades where they were. I think Kirkwood did that about 2 weeks ago, where they said, listen, if this is where you're at and you want to, that's it, that's fine. I think they did that for the seniors. Are you hearing that kind of thing going on throughout the state as well?
Yeah, this was such a sort of a quick turn of events for us, and that most of the districts that I've heard from are really working more towards a sort of hold harmless for kids. So if they can improve their grades, if they want to do pass fail, really moving more towards how do we continue to incentivize students to stay engaged in the process and yet not really penalize them for something that is not within their control. And so lots of different approaches. But I think that too, not to get too deep on this one, but it really gets into the intrinsic, extrinsic motivation for our children. Do you need that grade to motivate you? So we're getting this has been a really interesting time for us in education. Lots of approaches.
As horrible as this pandemic's been, I would have just loved that aspect of this. Yeah. Just like you could go down, grade would have been protected.
Doctor, my daughter works for Teach for America. So she works with kids who aren't in the best of circumstances and in the better districts. And I know that she would want me to ask, this whole thing seems like it's going to exacerbate the divide between the well-to-do kids with stable homes and computers and the poor kids who don't have a place to study at home and don't have computers. Do you have any specific ideas on how you can work on that?
Yeah, that came to fruition very quickly. I mean, and people knew that would likely occur, but it raised its head very, very quickly in the process. And so one of the big things that we want to do when they come back in the fall, hopefully in the summer for summer school opportunities, is that diagnostic portion that I was just talking about, finding out where kids are and meeting them there and providing the appropriate interventions that might be needed there. Do not make an assumption that everybody's going to come in the same place. It's not going to happen. And so our job as educators is to find out where they are and then really work with each individual student to get them to where they need to be. So again, going back to the question about grades itself, I think this will call into lots of discussion about just what, the competency versus the grades for students and where should they be in each process. And so I think that's what you'll see us doing. And we're all taking that concern very seriously.
Doctor, do you think that if we find that a number of teachers have comorbidities like hypertension or diabetes, obesity, they will probably not be able to return to the school. And if that is the case, is there a possibility of a teacher shortage come fall?
There was a possibility of a teacher shortage before that. So yeah, I mean, I am, again, another level of concern for us. We're looking at ways to expand the substitute pool. We're looking at ways to make sure that our teachers can continue to be certificated through this process. One of the first things we did, because you don't even think about all the layers of school closure and what that's going to do. But one thing it did was interrupted student teaching time. And so our educator preparation programs have to work with those student teachers to find alternate ways to get them certificated. So wanted to make sure we didn't stop that pipeline, but we're still making sure that they were well equipped to enter into the classroom. So yes, I will just say to our viewers, teaching is an incredible profession. And on the one hand, I am concerned about it. On the other hand, wow, have they risen to the occasion? And I have heard so many good things about our teachers and what really matters in these various professions. And I'm hoping we'll see a lot of people who feel called to that profession, because it certainly is. As so many of you have family members, that's great to hear, can share with us what a difference they make in kids' lives, and that they really matter. And so hopefully we'll see more people interested in these service fields after living through this experience.
I have another question for you. So one of my sons is special needs, and he's in a special needs classroom. And there's been a lot of talk about, if we go back and social distancing, these kids really don't have that good of a concept. I mean, my teacher's aide in that class was telling me, I'm literally going to have to throw my body in between kids to keep them from being so close. So is there anything you can offer just on thoughts on special education and how it's also being impacted by this crisis?
Yeah, special education is another area that has created its own set of needs, and we're working hard with none of the federal guidance or any of the rules have been laxed at all in that, because it's such an important, and they haven't waived anything. So making sure that we're taking care of those kids is absolutely important. I will tell you, I had a call this morning with about, 35 or so superintendents from across the state. And there was that very discussion. We have to get realistic on what can we assure parents that we can do in classrooms. When we start talking about social distancing with kids with special needs, a 5-year-old, I mean, we really have to think about what that means and what kinds of guarantees we can give to parents on that. You all know that as parents. It is, how would they comprehend that we're not going to high five our 5-year-old when they walk through the door? So this, it looks good on the guidance paper, but the reality of implementation of that, we have got some more work to do for those areas. We have 36 state schools for the severely disabled that are under the purview of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and we're working hard to address that very issue right now.
No, Ray raised the issue of funding earlier. How exactly does Missouri rank in terms of funding when it comes to per pupil in the classroom in elementary and secondary education versus other states?
Well, I haven't looked at those numbers in a while, I have to tell you. I will say that I've been very, very pleased that the last several years we have been able to fully fund the formula. That's good news. But typically, if you look at the numbers, we're on the lower end. I think people are aware of that. Where it exactly falls, I can't tell you right now, but I can get back to you on that. But we're lower on the per pupil expenditure component, but we have fully funded. And I'm going to tell you that right prior to this, the House and the Senate were doing their conference committee. They're getting ready to approve the budget tomorrow. Education was held in high regard throughout that process. So that's our job, is to continue to talk about the absolute importance of education. It's an investment, and our state needs to continue to support that.
Doctor, you're in a hot seat all the time. I'm sorry, Charlie. I was going to say, you're in a hot seat all the time. What is the during this pandemic, what would you say in terms of maybe, I don't know, controversy, but sort of emotion? What dominates your inbox? What are the topics that people are most, anxious about and talk to you about and complain about, whatever?
Well, about 30 seconds to go, Doctor.
Okay. Well, I think the hardest part for me is the ways that across the state people have even viewed the issue. So some people think it's very, very serious and we won't be going back to school. Some people think we should be in school today. So it's just a very broad take on what this virus really means to the state. And so that to me has been part of the challenge.
No doubt. Thank you so much for all the great questions tonight, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Vandeven, for joining us. Margie Vandeven from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Christine Byers, for sitting in for Wendy Weiss. We really appreciate your time tonight, Christine.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, everybody. We'll be back next week at this time. Stay safe.
Thanks.
Center row of Hollywood Squares all has red on.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.